Happy Thursday, Dog Nation. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are still here in studio and having a great time. Busy show coming up. I was saying before the show began that it really kind of feels like a normal time in that there's more stuff than we have show to cover. A lot of what's out there today and out there the last couple of days bleeds into Friday. You really feel like there's just a lot of news out there. A lot of it really relates to the return of college football. So that's all really fun. It seems like you're heading the right direction on that. You got to be careful about a couple of subjects. We'll kind of get into that over the course of the program too. So a lot to do as far as all that goes. We're also going to have some fun today with a national writer who has proclaimed on the basis of his list that Jamie Newman's not only the best quarterback in the SEC, but the best transfer quarterback for 2020. We'll let him explain that coming up in a moment. It's Bill Bender from the Sporting News. I will give you a programming note on that. Bill had a scheduling conflict, so as opposed to kind of hitting him at 15 minutes after the hour the way we typically would have guessed, we'll take a few comments, and then we'll get him around the half-hour mark. Bottom of the hour, I believe they like to say. We'll get him at the half-hour mark in our show here today. You'll like that. He has a lot of good things to say about Georgia quarterback Jamie Newman. We will do that coming up. Some recruiting stuff for us off the top. A little bit of a look at a leader that may be emerging on the Georgia offense. Georgia basketball kind of got some good news, so we'll spread the wealth and cover it all next as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, fun guest coming up for us in a couple of minutes here today. We're going to talk to Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Bill has ranked the top 25 quarterbacks in college football, and on his list quite high, he has Georgia's Jamie Newman. We'll let him explain later on why he not only ranks Newman ahead of, like, say, Florida Scal Trask, but also all the other quarterbacks in the SEC. That'll be fun with Bill Bender coming up in just a few minutes. Speaking of that, before we get to Bill Bender on the subject of fun, let me talk about some Georgia recruiting for a moment. It's kind of cool to see the onslaught, the blitz that Georgia seems to have put together for the pass rusher, Dallas Turner, out of St. Thomas Aquinas High School down there in South Florida. If you looked at Kirby Smart's Twitter feed yesterday, you saw this continual series of retweets of a lot of, it's everything from like current Georgia commits like David Daniel and Lavassier Carroll, former Georgia player Lorenzo Carter, current players in between Darnell Washington, Malik Herring, Aziz Ojolari. You saw Brock Vandegrift, I guess is the guy that got all this started. Eric Stokes getting involved too. That wanted Apex Predators poster-looking edit thing that Georgia's put together, all about Dallas Turner, all about trying to get his attention and kind of get going there with him on the big recruitment here. Now, as I said before, it's really fun to see such a coordinated effort being led by Georgia players to get involved with Turner. Honesty compels me to admit the reasons why the social media blitz is taking place may be a little less fun. I thought that Jeff had our buddy Jeff Sintel, our DawgNation recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel, had a very revealing story about Dallas Turner going back a couple of weeks ago where he said that right now Alabama probably leads over Georgia, mentioning the championships that Alabama has won, mentioning the players that Alabama's put into the National Football League. You can't really dispute that. If that matters to Turner, it's easy to see why he's going to like Alabama in that regard. However, the other thing that Turner said in that story with Jeff Sintel at DawgNation.com may have been even more important than that, and it may have kind of flown below the surface. It's one thing for him to say Alabama's my leader. It's another thing for him to say, I'm not sure I need to take all 5 of my official visits to make my decision about where I want to go to school. That's the part that complicates all of this. And that's the reason why if you've got willing recruits and players who can make a social media blitz to a pass rusher like Dallas Turner, you probably need to do it because Turner has said before, there's a school other than Georgia that's probably my leader, and I don't know that I'm going to have to hold out and get all my visits done to ultimately make that decision. Now, complicating matters even more, let me let you hear Jeff Sintel from Before the Hedges presented by Kroger last night on the DawgNation video channels. If it's already been acknowledged that Georgia's in a big-time battle with Alabama for Dallas Turner, there is someone else who has now entered the chat. Jeff Sintel told us about that last night. Take a listen to this.
Dallas Turner out of St. Thomas Aquinas, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Really great pass rusher there. He was the South Florida Defensive Player of the Year. Now, Clemson's in there a little bit now. Clemson recently offered. I'm sure the Tigers will probably do their best to get a visit once recruiting can reopen. Quick reminder there, folks, that recruiting cannot happen on campus until at least through the end of June. That's according to the most recent NCAA legislation.
So I think that's a problem for Georgia, right? This is one of those examples of, I think for the most part, it seems like Georgia's done a pretty good job of managing the absence of visits that's taking place. They seem to, at least on the basis of some of the reporting that we've seen, Jeff Sintel included, they seem to have maintained pretty good contact. Kirby Smart's been really, really careful in a lot of the interviews that he's done, whether it be the press conference he did for all reporters a few weeks ago or a couple of the one-on-one things he's done since then. I believe in just about every instance that we've heard from Smart publicly over the last few weeks, he has cautioned against reaching out to these recruits too much because of I've described it before as commission breath. It seems like you're a little too pushy. It seems like you're forcing them to make a decision a little too soon. Smart seems to be really cognizant of all of that. He has seemingly handled that pretty well. But if you are in the trailing position on a recruit and you are currently banned from hosting that recruit on a visit, it's hard to make up that ground right now, which is why I think you see the creativity that's out there with Georgia trying to get its former players like Lorenzo Carter, its current players like Stokes and Ojulari and the others, and the recruits, kind of getting involved here, trying to, reach out and let a guy like Dallas Turner know that the Georgia players very much want to see him as a part of that class. And what it kind of reminds me of a little bit, a few days ago, Jeremy Pruitt, who's obviously been on a little bit of a recruiting heater as of late. I think they had another commit again yesterday. I mean, they're going to have 75 commits before the summer even officially starts. But nonetheless, he was doing a local radio interview in Knoxville about some of the recruiting success they had had. Now, he can't mention the recruits by name, but he was willing to kind of have a generic recruiting conversation. And Pruitt at the time actually spoke about using your current players or the willingness of your players, recruits, to help recruit their teammates. And in seeing what's gone on with Georgia over the last couple of weeks, what Pruitt said about this seems really relevant. Now, when you hear Jeremy, he's obviously talking about the Tennessee situation, but given the fact that Pruitt and Smart are kind of in some ways cut from the same cloth, it's easy to understand Pruitt's explanation for why Tennessee players are getting involved with recruitment, to understand why the same thing is going on to Georgia. And by the way, not just for Dallas Turner, but for others. Turner just the latest example of that. Let me let you hear Jeremy Pruitt on this subject for a moment.
I believe it goes back, to our players and the guys that they help recruit. And, the guys we have on our team right now, they want to be the best that they can possibly be, and they work hard at it. They work hard in the classroom. They work hard on the field, in the weight room, and they do in recruiting. So, they know who they want to play beside, and, who the better players you have on the team, the better opportunity you have as a team and as an individual. So these guys are bought into that, and they're working hard to help recruit the best student athletes to Tennessee.
I mean, I think that Pruitt makes a pretty good point there, that it's a pretty good reflection on the program when your former players, current players, recruits are willing to do this. To me, it's almost like a restaurant review of not that many people want to go to a restaurant. They can't go find some Yelp or whatever you're doing. You want to see some satisfied customers before you make a choice to do anything. And when recruits or players are saying, hey, this is the school you want to be at, I guess the symbolism and all that is, I'm happy with the choice that I made. And from that standpoint, I think it's really good. And by the way, this isn't always the case. Let me take the opportunity here to get a little bit of a dig on the Florida Gators. I mean, I don't think that Chauncey Gardner, the former Gators defensive back, is going to be doing any recruiting for Florida as of late, based on some of the things that he said about the Gators on social media lately. Luke Ankrum, the former offensive lineman, I don't think he's going to be doing much of that kind of stuff either. Not every player who plays in an SEC school goes on to be happy about the school that he played at. We've seen some examples of some former Florida players where that's very much true. So the fact that a guy like Lorenzo Carter is willing to do that, that's something good about the happiness that he has with his choice. Current players, you better believe they want the best going alongside with them. So it's kind of a fun thing to see. In this case, it's Georgia players pushing after Dallas Turner. The reason why it's taking place, maybe that's not quite so much fun. Looks like Turner's got a lot of competition right now for his choice, and Georgia's not lead spot, not even be in the number 2 spot at the moment. But nonetheless, the tactic being used here, I think, is creative. It looks like a next phase for recruitment, especially during a time in which you can't have those visits. You can't sell yourself on campus. So you sell yourself with what you do have available. And for Georgia, lucky enough, what it has available are some pretty happy current recruits, current players, and former players to extol the virtues of playing at UGA. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We were presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it's great to have you with us. And boy, it's good to have Merriweather and Tharp with us too. You know, our friends, Bob Tharp, the whole team over there, they were very, very gracious to us during the entire time when we were doing the show from home. Because let's face it, when you're doing the show from home, you don't see the cool Merriweather and Tharp logo on the screen behind me. By the end, now our buddy Michael Carvel had gotten it, so we were able to play the Merriweather and Tharp video and give the full value for the most part. But for a while there, it was just a hand-drawn Merriweather and Tharp logo that my kids had made. But our friends over there, they were very gracious about all of that, very complimentary for us getting back in the studio. So I love having great partners here at DawgNation Daily, and Merriweather and Tharp is as good as you're ever going to get in regards to that. And let me tell you this, they are also tenacious fighters for you, too, because as friendly and fun as they can be, they also know how to get after it when it comes to getting what you need during the divorce process. That means rebuilding your relationship with your family, including your children. That means protecting your finances. That means making you whole again. If you're going through a divorce, it's obviously a huge challenge. I understand all of that. But the challenge can be made less daunting when you have a smart fighter on your side, and the entire team there at Merriweather and Tharp, they wouldn't be in the building over there if they didn't have those credentials. So they are your source for Georgia divorce. I say that all the time. And my advice to you is to reach out, get in touch, have them on your side. Learn about the process. They've been through this thousands of times. They can put that knowledge to work for you. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. One more thing on recruiting before I dive into what else I want to get into. So Jeff Sintel, who you heard from a moment ago, will be with us tomorrow. Now, in addition to talking about Dallas Turner, I'm sure that'll come up. There are a couple of other things that I think are bubbling right now that we got to deal with Jeff tomorrow. One good, one not so good. Let me start with the good. It seems like there's a little growing chatter out there, maybe, and I mean maybe, about Georgia and former Clemson commit Corey Foreman, a big-time defensive end prospect. Seems like there might be something going on there, maybe more of a possibility. Let's say it that way. That Georgia really might have a chance to kind of get in on a visit for Foreman or something along those lines. We'll let Jeff tell us if there's anything new about that when he joins us tomorrow. Then the not so good, and there's a long way to go here, doesn't necessarily the end of the world. A little bit of UNC chatter in Tony Grimes as of late. I'm not so excited about that necessarily for the 5-star cornerback, but Jeff will tell us about all of that tomorrow when he joins us here on our program. As I said before, it's Bill Bender coming up in a moment. Bill has touted, on the basis of his ranking of the top 25 quarterback in college football, Jamie Newman as the SEC's best, transfer market-wise, the best available in America. We'll let Bill Bender from Sporting News tell us more about that in a moment, and we'll have some fun with the rest of these SEC quarterbacks on his list. Before we get to that, a cool video got shared on social media of what looks to be confirming some of the other videos that we've seen of a quite slimmed down Jamari Salyer. In fact, I think we have some evidence from Salyer on the scales here. Big Dog Club LLC, that's at Coach Kev79 on Twitter, shares this with us. Jamari Salyer down to 312 pounds standing on the scales. That's obviously the kind of weight you think you want a tackle to have in the Matt Luke offense. You assume it's going to be a more athletic offensive line, an offensive line that's maybe moving around a bit more, not quite content to stand there and maul the way that the Georgia offensive lines did in the past with Sam Pittman. Good offensive lines those were, maybe just a little bit different when it comes to this Georgia offensive line led by Matt Luke. And speaking of leadership, when you see Salyer tipping the scales there at that number, clearly he's been working hard during this coronavirus lockdown. Clearly he's been trying to stay in the best possible shape that he can. I think it speaks to the leadership he should be able to have for you at Georgia. We know that last year's offensive line leader for the Dogs, Andrew Thomas, feels that way about his former teammate and former high school teammate there as well, because when he joined us for DawgNation Appreciation on video a couple of weeks ago, he certainly had plenty of good things to say about what he thinks that Salyer's going to grow into at Georgia this season. Here's what Andrew Thomas said about Jamari Salyer when he joined us a couple of weeks ago.
New face, Jamari Salyer on offense, I think is going to be new. A lot of guys, expected him to play really early. Things happen, but he's going to be a great player. He's kept his head up. He's going to continue to fight. I think he's going to, be the anchor on the offensive line.
I love that phrase from Thomas. He'll be the anchor of the offensive line. I think there's a chance that's true, and obviously the offseason work that Salyer is apparently doing is certainly evidence in that direction. We got into this conversation on video during our comment section on our RS Andrews cooldown not too long ago. Someone asked the question about who does Georgia take to SEC Media Days, assuming there is an SEC Media Days. Georgia typically takes 3. And I think you can make a case on the defensive side of the ball that the vocal representative leaders for Georgia, Monty Rice looks like a pretty good candidate there, and I would say Richard LeCount looks like another pretty good candidate. You can make a case for Eric Stokes because I think Stokes is a good talker and he's got a great personality, but the defensive names are fairly easy to identify. You're going to take at least one offensive guy, though, and it can be a little tough to figure out who that is. It's not necessarily best players. It's not necessarily Zamir White. It's not necessarily George Pickens. Those aren't talkers for Georgia necessarily yet. They aren't spokesmen for Georgia necessarily yet. Jamie Newman just got here. It seems very not much like Kirby Smart to pick a guy like Newman to be the spokesman for the team when he's only been at Georgia now just for a short little while. So you start wondering, well, if this team is looking for an offensive spokesman, a representative at a place like SEC Media Days, who does it end up being? I think on the basis of the offseason work that Salyer's apparently doing, I think he actually has a pretty good candidate to be that guy. I think Andrew Thomas, now he and Salyer are friends, so obviously Thomas is going to vouch for Salyer, but it doesn't mean he's wrong. When he says potential anchor for that offensive line, I don't think that's too strong of a word to use. And in a time we all have questions about who's doing what kind of work away from the program, it's kind of cool to see Jamari checking in on social media as much as he is, give an indication that he's taking this time very seriously, putting himself in the best possible condition he can be in. I think that'll pay off for him on the field later on this season. It is very good to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today. We got a lot of stuff to come and get to throughout the program, including some interesting insight in what football might look like when it returns later on this year, and it seems likely we're heading that direction. We'll get to that later. For now, more on Jamie Newman. Let's talk to Bill Bender from the Sporting News. And as I promised for our video audience a moment ago, we're going to get Bill. We're going to do that probably about 12 minutes from right now. A little bit of a scheduling conflict prevented him from joining us at what is our normal guest time. So we'll do that with him coming up in just a couple of moments. We'll also have our R.S. Andrews cooldown at the end of the show as well. But for now, we have a little bit of time to kind of dive in here and get into some comments. So I'll give you guys a chance to weigh in on whatever you want to. You want to talk about the Dallas Turner situation? You want to talk about what we saw from Salyer, some of the other recruiting stuff that I brought up? I'll give you guys a chance to do that. And then about a little bit more than 10 minutes from now, we'll hit Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Bill's always a really good guest, one of these really, I think, well-informed national writers. So we'll do that with him here in a few minutes. Let me get YouTube first. I did Facebook yesterday. I'll do YouTube first. Then we'll hit some Facebook stuff before we move on with the rest of the show. Good to see James Wade and Silent Chaos going back and forth here a little bit. Silent Chaos also says that he thinks the Georgia backfield was too crowded for Will Shipley. Shipley recently made his pledge off the market. That was a guy we talked about at one point in time. Shipley go to Clemson? Is that where he went? Yeah, he chose over Notre Dame, right? It was Clemson over Notre Dame? Yeah. Obviously, he drew some of those interesting comparisons, but yeah, Shipley off the open market here now. Jerry Dogs fan, looking forward to seeing Dejon Edwards. That should be a lot of fun to see. Richard Smith, thanks for the kind words. He says, I read on ESPN this morning where Georgia looks like the best in the entire country of weathering an adjusted season financially. Yeah, you've heard some of that kind of stuff. I mean, Georgia, generally speaking, has been in better financial situation than a lot of other SEC programs anyway. Like, the one thing I've always said about the so-called emergency fund that Georgia has in place is just because you've got it doesn't mean you're willing to use it. For instance, I don't mean to bring like Harvard's got a $4 billion endowment, but they were still trying to get some emergency funds during coronavirus. Sometimes the presence of money doesn't necessarily mean that you're looking to spend that money. The Georgia Emergency Fund could be, kind of the same way there, but Georgia seemingly is in pretty good shape financially speaking. Let's see what else is going on over here on YouTube. Enrique Murillo says it's good to see back in the office. Appreciate that. Beard looks good too. Enrique, thanks for the kind word. Excited to see the boys getting back to work. Yeah. So the NCAA comes out yesterday lifting the moratorium, and now it's up to the individual conferences to decide when that's going to take place. It has been reported that Ohio State's looking at June 8th. SEC votes tomorrow about either June 1st, June 15th. Your buddy Demetrius Robertson on Twitter, he's already cast his vote for June 1st. He gave you Sonic the Hedgehog video yesterday on Twitter saying he's looking to get back to Georgia on June 1st. That's kind of a cool thing to be able to see. And I think that's all really exciting and really good. One of the things I'm going to get into a little bit later in the show is something that Ohio State athletic director Gene Smith said yesterday. They're looking at, now that's a 100,000-seat stadium at the Horseshoe. They're looking at a variety of social distancing scenarios where, in one respect, you may only have like 20,000 fans in the stands. We said this yesterday, that if you've got to have 6 feet in between every person, that only gives you room for about 20,000 in a 100,000-seat stadium. Somebody else brought up in our comment section, which was a good point, that, okay, but most people don't go to the games by themselves. You take someone with you, your spouse, whatever else. And so from that standpoint, maybe that gives you some room for some more people, because if you're bringing your household with you, you're not socially distancing them, because you don't do that while you're at home anyway, which may be how you get from his thought of 20,000 to 50,000. I would encourage you to read what Connor Riley wrote at DawgNation.com this morning, chronicling Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's appearance on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday. Kemp, for the most part, obviously speaks in optimistic tones, but not looking to be too specific about what Labor Day at Mercedes-Benz Stadium looks like between Georgia and Virginia or anything like that. Obviously, I'm biased here. I want as many fans as I can get. We even joked about this in terms of what happens in Tuscaloosa when Georgia plays, there. Even in that scenario, even though it makes it tougher to win the game if you're in a hostile crowd, I still am hopeful that these games feel more like normal games than not. I am hopeful of that. I was a little taken aback by Gene Smith openly acknowledging the large possibility that you don't have, full crowds there in Columbus, because if you think about one of the schools that you would assume would be the most bullish on college football's return, obviously you'd assume that'd be Ohio State. So he very open to the possibility that social distancing is going to exist and going to be real. That's similar to what some of the things we've seen coming out of like Kentucky and South Carolina. You've seen some of that out there the last little bit, and as I have said before, it is no easy choice to determine who gets those tickets. If a place like Sanford Stadium, talking about a 93,000-seat stadium, if it's only a quarter of that or less, how you make those choices between the recent donors who've given a lot of money, that's what the McGill Society is, the long-haul donors who maybe haven't ever wowed you in any one year, but over the course of time have dedicatingly given that money. Boy, that is a political football right there of the highest magnitude. You couldn't pay me to have that job. Let me do a couple more on YouTube. We'll pop over to Facebook, and then we'll get Bill Bender from the Sporting News coming up around 10:30 today. Chili Vic, who's an LSU fan, says that, but when it comes to Cedric Von Pran, that we really wanted that center out of New Orleans last year, and Kirby got him. He was hell-bent on leaving the state, and he says that Warren Easton, that's the school that Van Pran went to, LSU are not on good terms maybe. That was a great recruitment on Georgia's part, because, I always felt like that Cedric Von Pran out of LSU was a tough pull. Now, come to find out, the Von Pran family has pretty significant ties to the state of Georgia, and that probably helped things a little bit. But when you're looking at the big recruiting wins of Kirby Smart, the Cedric Von Pran win is a pretty big one, because this is a guy that's on that list of offensive linemen who expect to be playing sooner rather than later. I'm not going to say right away, because Georgia's deep in the interior of its offense. But as a center or as a guard, it's going to be hard to keep. The indication is it's going to be hard to keep Van Pran off the field. We'll find out more when we actually see him on campus. But the indication is it's going to be hard to keep him off the field. When you're looking at the list of big wins for Kirby Smart, I think you've got to put Cedric Von Pran on that list. And even though the Van Pran recruitment was seemingly kind of locked up before Matt Luke got here, the fact there was no wavering on Van Pran's part once Luke was hired, I do think that's also a bit of a feather in the cap of Matt Luke as well. So, yeah, there have been so many recruiting wins for Georgia, it's kind of easy to forget a few of them, or the ones that ended up not being that dramatic, and Van Pran's an example. That was one that I expected to be more dramatic before it was done, and it never really got there. It just never really happened. So I think you've got to give Georgia a lot of credit for the way in which it won that. I do think you have. James Crump on the subject of recruiting says Mason Smith's going to be a tougher pull than Van Prawn, but with Foreman it becomes easier. And that was one of the things that Jeff mentioned. I hope you guys watch Before the Hedges presented by Kroger yesterday. And James says it one way, Jeff kind of said it the other way. Jeff was kind of looking at Mason Smith as that keystone recruit that might pull the lever on Corey Foreman. James says you get Foreman, you get Mason Smith. Jeff was sort of saying the other way. Georgia probably has a longer established relationship with Mason Smith. Has not visited Georgia, I don't believe, but in terms of connection, probably a little bit longer connection with Mason Smith. But Jeff says, if you get involved with Mason Smith and Corey Foreman very publicly have talked about the idea of playing together. Most of the time, these package deals don't typically materialize as much as the social media chatter would lead you to believe they do. But James Crump on the subject that was kind of touched on by Jeff yesterday, and one of the reasons why I want to talk to Jeff about that tomorrow is just how realistic it is you might be able to get involved in some situation like that. Jamie Kennedy says, how are you feeling about us losing Barrett Carter to Clemson? Seems like a lot of the top talent in Georgia's leaving the state. Yeah, what I've said about this a couple times is I'm amazed it doesn't hurt more. I mean, Barrett Carter's a really good player. I used to live in Swanee, so I have a little bit of affection for the North Gwinnett program. I also used to do high school football games years ago, and North Gwinnett was always a really fun team to watch. This is back in the Bob Spire days. Spire's at Camden County now, I think. But North Gwinnett used to be a really fun team to watch. I've always kind of liked the program, so I've kind of known who Barrett Carter was for a little bit longer than I might typically know who some of these recruits are. So, yeah, I mean, it stinks not to get him. And as I said, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being serious. I'm amazed it doesn't hurt more because there have been a few of these last couple of years where you're like, wow, this player would be great to have at Georgia. He's right there in the backyard, and it just doesn't happen. And part of that's because Clemson's winning national championships. When you have a program as close as Clemson is that's winning national championships and has kind of a nice brand for itself of kind of a fun program where players are treated well, that's a tough thing to battle against in recruiting. And you see a lot of the other programs near Clemson who've, I think, really suffered because of that. And it's kind of amazing that for Georgia, when it has lost some of these high-profile recruits, and it hasn't all been to Clemson. Rick Gilbert to LSU is also one that really stung for me a year ago because I just thought Gilbert was one of the coolest-looking recruits I'd seen. But it just doesn't seem to hurt. Georgia goes and get the Darnell Washington. Georgia will probably go out and get, whether it be Xavier Sorey or Smile Mondon, whomever else. Georgia will seemingly respond to losing Barrett Carter. And I'm not telling you that Georgia didn't want Carter, and certainly get the impression he was probably a priority. And maybe if you want to go back in time, at one point in time, people thought Barrett Carter would go to Georgia. They've lost a couple of these battles, and they have still built like number 1, number 2 recruiting classes. It's nowhere near as easy as Georgia has made it look to miss on close proximity priorities and then go out and nail a national recruit that's just as big. It's really pretty amazing. It's really pretty amazing. All right, let me get a couple more here, and we're like 2 minutes away from Bill Bender. Barry Waters says we need to win some SEC championships and a national championship, or recruiting's going to taper off. We've got to get it done soon. Yeah, Barry, I don't think that it's in danger of, to use your phrase, tapering off like this cycle or the next cycle. But at a certain point in time, when these other programs do have that to sell, I mean, in the case of Dallas Turner, from his own mouth, as I spoke about before here on our program, that clearly mattered for him. I'm not going to, tell you that doesn't help a program like Clemson, program like Alabama. I think obviously now the reigning national champion is LSU. That helps them. If you're looking to maintain that momentum, I think you've got to have. I also think some of those position groups we haven't quite seen the NFL draft breakthrough yet. I think that's going to matter for Georgia as well. Defensive line is going to be crucial on that front the next couple of draft cycles, getting guys into the NFL draft at those positions. Eventually, you have to fully fill out your resume. And if you don't, I do think recruiting probably tapers off there at that point in time. We see this evidence. If you want to go back to, like, say, when Bob Stoops won a championship at Oklahoma in 2000, all the coaches that have won championships since then, with the exception of Mack Brown at Texas, the exception of Dabo Swinney at Clemson, all the coaches who won their first championship at a school, they did so within their first 4 years. That's because they come in, got the energy, you've got the excitement, pay off on it big, and then the machine is kind of built. Other examples, when you kind of come in, you have the hype, you have the excitement, but if you can't pay off on that moment, when you have that extra mind share, when you can't pay off on that, all of a sudden, that becomes a little tougher to maintain that. I think, unfortunately, you may have even seen a little bit of an example of that with Mark Richt in the past there as well. So I don't think that's an unfair comment to make, that if you're going to have the recruiting success, you got to maximize those guys while they're here to keep that momentum going. I think that's probably pretty fair. We've got more of your comments coming up. We'll get to that, but I do want to have some fun here with Jamie Newman, his comparison to the rest of the SEC, his comparison to the other college quarterback, an exact transfer quarterback, and exactly what is going on with the return of football based on the NCAA yesterday. Let's do all of that right now with Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Really glad to get a chance to talk to Bill Bender. First time in a while for us to have Bill on the show. National writer for the Sporting News. Always fun content, especially this time of year when even during the midst of the coronavirus, you feel like you're turning that corner, getting ready for the start of the season. Bill, good enough to whet our appetite for some of these comparisons and really fun opinions, and also good enough to join us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp here today. Bill, hope you're staying safe and healthy. Looks like you're anticipating the start of the season much the same way we are, so we appreciate you stopping by to speak to us about it for a few minutes.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So let me begin with this. I liked your ranking of the top 25 quarterbacks in college football. Georgia fans certainly probably enjoyed seeing Jamie Newman make the top 10 there at number 10. This is obviously an audience here that's glad to see that, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, we haven't seen Newman yet at Georgia. We haven't seen Newman yet go against an SEC schedule. What did you see in him to make you feel confident ranking him as high on your list as you did?
I just think he's going to fit with the new offensive coordinator. He's going to be set up for success with the weapons around him. Great receivers, and at Wake Forest he was able to put up big numbers, and I think that's what Georgia needed to do. They needed to go get a quarterback that can do a little bit of both. Going to be able to. I think what they saw with LSU is what you've got to do in college football now. You got to score a bunch of points, and the teams I think can go out and do that.
Let me bring you in on the discussion that Georgia fans have been having, for a while now. I think there's a belief among the fan base that the Georgia offense does need to change at least some. That's why Todd Monken was brought in. But there's also this sense of, in a weird offseason where there was no spring practice, given Kirby Smart's inclinations to want to maybe keep doing things the way that they've been doing them for a while, do you get the sense that Todd Monken will get the full control to make the changes that Georgia probably needs to make? He obviously brings a different philosophy in place than what Georgia's had before. If you had to prognosticate, and this is kind of an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, if you had to prognosticate how much width that a guy like Monken has to make the necessary changes so a guy like Newman can thrive, how much of that would you expect to see?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. And I'm not answering it, but I think they are going to have to open the offense up a little bit and not just resemble something that is the early Nick Saban dynasty, because the game has changed. That you can win 10 games with that style of offense. You can go to the Sugar Bowl every year with that offense. But like I said, LSU, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, they've shown that the model is you take a quarterback that can tilt the field, you get it to the weapons, and you go out and try to average 40 to 45 points per game. That's what it takes to win a national championship now. So I think all of those things are at work.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I thought it was interesting that Newman comes in at number 10 on your list. Kyle Trask comes in at number 14. My guess is you may have heard from a few Gators fans on that. Obviously, around here, we hear from Florida fans too, and they are of the belief that because Trask is established as a starter, because he's working with Dan Mullen, that it's really Trask's year to thrive. I guess, what did you see in Trask that made you want to rate him a little lower than some Florida fans probably thought he should have been ranked?
Well, I think he's going to be a guy that takes the jump in his second year with Dan Mullen. You got to trust Dan Mullen in this instance, and I think Dan Mullen did a good job of quarterback. And Kyle Trask stepped in there, didn't make a lot of mistakes, played pretty efficient, and look for him to continue to do that next year, and maybe take that next step in development. We'll see if he does.
obviously one of the interesting things about Trask is it sort of feels like some of the things that we've heard about him this offseason, not necessarily from you, but other people who do what you do for a living, they do sound a little bit similar to me to some of what you're hearing about Felipe Franks before the start of last year. We ultimately know how that ended. Is there a chance that maybe Florida fans also end up disappointed and maybe Trask kind of goes the way of Franks, of maybe not quite being that next generation of what people think of as a Dan Mullen quarterback, especially given the fact that Trask doesn't really do what Mullen quarterbacks typically do, which is run around a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's a guy that Trask showed with the experience last year that he is. I think he's a little bit more efficient passer than Felipe Franks was. I think he's a little more accurate. I think he understands that offense. He's a big target. He's just a different style player. So, there's a reason why Felipe Franks transferred, because Kyle Trask won that job. So I think he'll be a little bit better than that.
Let me talk to you about the situation in Alabama for a moment, because it's kind of interesting. I've said about Georgia before that if you had to have a year where you're a little uncertain at quarterback, as you said, Georgia's got a talented guy. We just haven't seen him yet at UGA. We haven't seen him in the SEC. This is probably a pretty good year for that to be true, just given the other uncertain situations in this conference, including the situation in Alabama. Bill, I think there's a really good chance that Georgia plays Alabama twice, and I think there's a pretty good chance they face different quarterbacks in both those games. The September matchup, I would say there's a very good chance it's Mac Jones who gets the nod from Saban there, but it might be Bryce Young by the end of the season if these two teams are playing again in December in the SEC Championship. How would you compare the situation of, hey, according to your own rankings, Alabama doesn't have a top 10 quarterback right now, but in a day and age in which very few teams have any depth at quarterback, Alabama's got 2 of the top 25. What do you make of the competition potentially going on between Jones and Bryce Young, and you have much of a handicap on that for right now?
I think I would kind of agree with you. I think Bryce Young continues to see reps as the season goes on. What killed, I think, his chances to start in week one is he didn't have spring practice, and he didn't get those snaps and experience in spring practice that would allow him to make that jump. So, there's a very good chance Georgia plays them twice. There's a very good chance that in the second game that Bryce Young would play a more of a role in that offense, because, again, Mac Jones did well last year. He played very well, but this is that debate that we were just having. Would you rather have a Jake Fromm or a guy like Jamie Newman who can run the offense? And I think at the end of the day, they're going to look at Bryce Young's playmaking skills, and he may end up being that guy.
In the situation in Alabama, that when you look at Tua Tagovailoa and what happened for him, I think one of the things that didn't get talked about enough is, not that Tua's not a obviously very good player, but I think he was greatly aided by one of the best collection of wide receiver talent I've ever seen on any one team at one time. Now, obviously, Ruggs and Judy are gone off that group for 2020, but when you're trying to establish either Mac Jones in a full season or Bryce Young stepping in as a freshman phenom, the presence of Jalen Waddle, the presence of Devontae Smith, I think that really helps the Alabama quarterback no matter who it is. I think it helped Tua Tagovailoa more than ultimately those receivers were given credit for. And ultimately, if you're Georgia, you're thinking about facing the Crimson Tide in Tuscaloosa in September. Dealing with those Alabama wide receivers is still a significant issue, even if 2 of the guys that were headliners from a year ago are now gone. So I'm assuming you'll agree with this, but one of the things that makes that Alabama quarterback transition easier is the fact that they still have a lot of talent left in that receiver room.
Yeah, they get Devontae Smith back, and Najee Harris, that's another excellent guy. They've got a ton of weapons. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to change. I think they're going to continue to have this really dynamic offense around the running game, and whichever quarterback plays, that's why they're going to be the hands-on favorite in the SEC West again, especially with what LSU lost. I think Auburn's going to be pretty good, but there's no doubt in my mind that Alabama's still the most talented team in the SEC.
Let me do a couple more quarterback things, and I want to ask about the NCAA stuff before we're done here. What do you think of Bo Nix going into year 2? You have a number 22 on your list. I've kind of jokingly said Jarrett Stidham's in line seemingly to be the starting quarterback of the New England Patriots. If he does well there in the Bill Belichick situation, you almost wonder, did Auburn get enough out of him when he was there? And it kind of puts more of a spotlight on Gus Malzahn, who seemingly is always in a wrestling match with his offensive coordinator about control over that situation. I actually think that Chad Morris is a pretty good hire, but I'm not quite so sure how much freedom he's going to have to influence what goes on there with Bo Nix. Auburn's in a unique situation, or at least a rare situation, in that it has an established starter in the SEC returning for this season. How confident are you in Bo Nix, and what do you expect to see from him in year 2?
I think his accuracy's got to improve. Once that does, I mean, the flashes of playmaking skill were there. He's a guy that had his moments as a freshman, and in Gus Malzahn's offense, he fits pretty well because he make a few plays scrambling around. So, yeah, I don't think anything different other than he's going to have to take that next step because Auburn's going to play all those same tough teams. They have a ridiculously tough schedule.
Yeah.
For the second straight season. They played North Carolina early in the year, and North Carolina's got a hot quarterback named Sam Howell. Pretty good.
Yeah, I noticed you had him number 3 on your list, third best quarterback in the country. If that's true, the season's going to be very interesting. As you said, it's a non-conference game against Auburn. It'll be an ACC championship game against Clemson. Sam Howell, who you rate very high out of North Carolina, that's one of those players that could have quite a say in what the postseason situation looks like.
Absolutely. I think he will, and that's a guy that's a team on the uptick. Mac's done a good job recruiting since he's come back, and people are looking back at Mac's first tenure at Minnesota. They won a lot of games, and they had a lot of NFL talent late in his first tenure there. Guys like Joe Bly, guys like Lonnie Holiday, and that's coming back. And I think something to keep in mind when you see that is that they're going to be pretty good, and I look for that to continue. They are recruiting in the top 5 right now. When was the last time we said that about North Carolina?
No doubt. Very interesting to see. Let me do one more thing before we let you go. NCAA yesterday lifts the moratorium on players voluntarily returning to campus. That can happen as soon as June 1st. There's a chance the SEC does open the door for that. They're going to vote on that tomorrow. It's no later than June 15th, probably. Sounds like Ohio State could be coming back right in between that on June the 8th. Seems like the Big 12 going to drag its feet a little bit more. What do you make of the various ways that folks around the country are making their plans for returning to football? At this point in time, it seems like we're going to have games in some form or fashion. What the summer looks like, I guess, is still somewhat up in the air. What do you make of the current situation as college football deals with the coronavirus?
Well, I think, like anything else, we just take the positive steps and go from there. There's a lot of logistical things that are going to need to happen for us to get college football back. I think we're on the right track, though. In Ohio, if you would ask me this 2 weeks ago, I'd have said no way. Now we're starting to see some positive steps in that direction. So I think college football's probably not going to look exactly like what we want it to look like. There's probably going to be a lot of measures in between along the way. But if we get it, I think it's going to be worth it. And then, it gives us an incentive to continue to do things that are consistent to the point so we can have it. And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, Bill, we appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today. For folks who want more of whether it be your quarterback rankings or any of the other preseason content you're doing right now, how can folks find you online?
Yeah, I mean, you can just find us at sportingnews.com. I appreciate you having me on, too. I know we've kind of circled around these same COVID topics on most of my radio hits, but it's actually nice to talk to somebody about something other than that. And you brought the good question today. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, Bill, thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Hey, take care.
All right, good stuff there, Bill Bender from the Sporting News. And, yeah, I mean, what he touches on there at the end is exactly our thought process in all of this. That ultimately the biggest story in the sport is when's the game's going to return, what do practices look like. But you can't just do that 24 hours. You just can't. I mean, ultimately, what people really want is how good is Jamie Newman? How much does he compare to, whatever the quarterback? How bad is Georgia going to be Florida? I mean, ultimately, that's what people really want. So there's a real big, uncertain thing hanging over our head. It's COVID-19 and blah, 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 and that's real and that's serious, and that's obviously the most important story. But we can't just, live our entire life following every twist and turn of that, because we are, after all, a football show. It seems like, parallel to the preseason football topic that we do, it seems like that the news in terms of football's eventual return continues to be, for the most part, good. We'll have more on this coming up in a moment. But our thought process, our theory around here has always been, we're going to assume there is a season until someone tells us there's not. The example I always cited for this was the SEC basketball tournament. They were planning to play the games until 5 seconds before one of them was supposed to tip. And at that point in time, everything got shut down. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm talking about going back to the middle of March when all of this was as uncertain as it possibly could have been. We said at the time, there's no reason to get scared and panic about not having a season. We were months and months away. Plan as if there will be, and if someone tells you there can't be, then just deal with that then. And that's kind of always been our attitude, and for the most part, I think that attitude has kind of been rewarded. One more thing on the Newman stuff before we turn the page on this. I didn't have time to get into this with him, but in addition to ranking Newman ahead of all the other SEC quarterbacks, he also ranked them ahead of all the transfers. Wow. And listen, there are two guys that once it became a possibility that Georgia might need a transfer quarterback, we talked about Derek King a lot, who ended up at Miami, Houston. We talked about KJ Costello a lot. Was at Stanford. He was healthy there. He played really well. Now he's at Mississippi State. He probably puts up some really big numbers. I don't think Bulldogs win very many games in Starkville, but I think that Costello probably puts up some pretty big numbers. And yet Bill Bender, national writer, says, I still like Newman over the other two, given all the situation there. So, this is not a guy who's emotionally connected to Newman the way that you might, DawgNation Daily might be. The guy that's got to, serve an entire country's worth of an audience. He sees some things he liked in Jamie Newman. It's kind of cool for me to think about. And can't wait to see Newman validate some of those opinions when he starts playing here this fall.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, very good stuff from Bill Bender. Really good to have him here on DawgNation Daily here today, and fun to start thinking about the upcoming season. It is going to be on its way here before you know it. At least that seems to be the case. As the NCAA does lift that moratorium, vote going down with the SEC, we will follow that and see how it goes. Now, in the midst of this, you're still dealing with a serious situation when it comes to the coronavirus, and I do want to touch on a couple of those stories here for a moment. Starting with, I guess the Tuscaloosa News broke this story. AL.com is actually where I read it, though. They did some reporting on this, too. So they're doing some stadium expansion at Bryant-Denny Stadium. They've had some construction work going on there. And I guess I'm going to have the general fact in this. About 100 construction workers working on this project. About 10 of them have tested positive for the coronavirus, according to what AL.com and the Tuscaloosa News have reported on this. I guess here's my only point. And some eyewitness accounts now say that since this has happened, there are a lot fewer people kind of milling around and doing the work compared to the large number of people that were working as recently as a few days ago. That's based on some eyewitness accounts there in Tuscaloosa. I think that we have to be very careful here. I don't think you necessarily treat it as a scandal when somebody tests positive. This is a real disease. It is contagious. It is out there. To be out and about in society, you're going to have some positive. You're going to have some positive tests. You're going to have that take place. It simply becomes a question of what do you do after that? How do you handle things after that? Because there's really very little I think you can do to prevent, some transmission from occurring here. It's about what you do after that. So obviously this is going to get a lot of attention because of the fact that it's Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's in the SEC on the verge of kind of making something happen. This is a lot of that. So you'll see what kind of goes on from there. By the way, speaking of coronavirus, more kind of bad news to report on this, at least for now. Former UGA grad, Auburn coach Pat Dye has apparently tested positive for coronavirus, according to reports. This will obviously get a lot of attention, rightly so, because the fact that Dye is 80. So tough situation there for him. We'll certainly have a lot of prayers for him. As a guy that Georgia had, did a lot of battles with back in the 80s, but at one point in time he was a very proud Georgia player, and someone I've heard speak a bunch of times and kind of be a part of college football community. He loves college football, so we'll have a lot of prayers going out to Pat Dye here on this. Speaking of Auburn, you may remember Jashawn Sheffield from one time. Guy who was kind of involved, Georgia was seemingly involved in this recruitment. He was out of coastal Georgia area, ended up going to Auburn. I guess he's been arrested for a DUI. He is suspended from the Auburn program for right now. So Sheffield not with Auburn at the moment. There's some news. We talked the other day about Bubba Chandler, the Georgia baseball commit, also a football player. He's from the Athens area. As expected, he committed to Clemson for both football and baseball. Chandler was not really on Georgia's radar from a football standpoint. Georgia had zeroed in on Brock Vandegrift. Chandler was not really on his radar, their radar as a football player, but was a baseball commit to the program. But Clemson has stepped in there. For the most part, I think the recruiting community's belief on this is that Clemson got involved with Chandler once Caleb Williams came out with his top three and did not include Clemson in that top three. So at that point in time, they had room for a quarterback, and at that point in time, Chandler became a guy they were interested in. I've jokingly said, for all the problems that that Clemson has caused for Georgia on the football side of things when it comes to recruiting, I guess now Clemson becoming a bit of a problem for Scott Strickland, the baseball program there as well at the moment. So we will follow that. But for now, Bubba Chandler, Athens area quarterback, has committed to Clemson for both football and baseball. A couple other stories to get to here for a moment. This is not really SEC related, but in a way it kind of is. So we talked before about the reports out of Columbus that Ohio State's looking like it's on its way back to campus on June the 8th. It seems like that's where they're heading. Voluntary player return there. Gene Smith, the athletic director, has also spoken a bit about what social distancing looks like inside the Horseshoe. Now, Ohio State's at a very big stadium, much the same way Georgia does. Ohio State there in Columbus, slightly bigger. He says they're looking at everything right now, if it's social distancing, everything from say 20,000 people, maybe as much as 50,000 people. I think the 50,000 number was something he had to come out and say after the fact, because when people initially heard the 20,000 thing, it was kind of taken there as the Ohio State athletic director says there's only going to be 20,000 people at the Horseshoe this year. He's since walked that back a little bit. When Brian Kemp, the Georgia governor, was on the Feinbaum show yesterday and speaking about whether it be the kickoff classic from Chick-fil-A to begin the season at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, he didn't want to be too specific about that there at the moment. So it seems like now the next big phase of this conversation is going to be, what does football look like when it does? Seems obvious playing games this fall. I even believe that we're going to be playing games week 1. I don't think anyone's necessarily going to have an empty stadium, but how many fans do you have in those stadiums? It seems like that's the next phase of this. It was interesting to hear the Ohio State athletic director speak out on this yesterday, because of the fact that Ohio State may be a Big Ten team, but there's kind of an SEC sensibility for how they go about their work, and so that's kind of what he said yesterday. A couple more things to do here real quick. The NCAA also comes out on the notion of the one-time transfer rule. They've pushed pause on that for right now. That's not going to happen for this upcoming year. So for the wave of transfers that we thought might be made eligible, including someone like, say, Cade Mays leaving Georgia to go to Tennessee, the rule is not going to be in place for this year, so that'll leave those transfers to be handled much the same way they have in the past there. So if you're looking for a wave of eligibility, including a guy like Mays there for Tennessee, this rule is going to slow down some of that talk a little bit, it would appear, and we will make that your SEC. And here on DawgNation Daily for a moment, I want to mention some good news for Georgia basketball, which added a graduate transfer yesterday from Stony Brook. His name's Andrew Garcia. I think he averaged somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 points a game for a Stony Brook Division I program. And listen, if you're double-digit scorer anywhere in Division I, that's obviously the kind of player that Georgia can use right now. That needs as much scoring as they can get. Garcia looks like a pretty nice prospect here. Pairing him with what I thought was a really nice graduate transfer addition from the kid from George Mason not too long ago. So Tom Crean knows he's got to rebuild his roster a little bit and using the transfer market to do that. I guess the one really big get I would have loved to have seen Georgia got, we talked about this a few days ago. Remember Romello White from Arizona State? White had played really well for Arizona State against Georgia in a game that Georgia was not good at all early in the season. He'd put himself out there as a graduate transfer. At one point in time, there was thought that Georgia interest might be there. The honest truth is, I had forgotten to even follow this story. I assumed that he was going to go to Vanderbilt because his Vanderbilt coach, Jerry Stackhouse, had an AAU relationship with White. Come to find out, Romello White committed to Ole Miss, which was a little bit surprising for me, but I guess come to find out, Ole Miss got a coaching relationship that knew him at Arizona State or whatever else. That would have been the graduate transfer that you would have liked to have seen Georgia got. Ultimately, that did not happen, but you get Andrew Garcia instead, a shooting guard, small forward type player, as Tom Crean tries to rebuild his program in the absence of Anthony Ant-Man Edwards and the other players that have left the program this year. Tom Crean tries to rebuild things. By the way, speaking of Tom Crean, it was a really good interview that our buddy Mike Griffith did with Crean recently as a part of his On the Beat program presented by Ingle. So you can check that on the DawgNation video channels. It's been quite a run as of late for DawgNation in terms of some really good interviews. Mike talking to Tom Crean recently with former Georgia coach Mark Richt. I thought that was a ton of fun, especially just given, I think that Coach Richt's in a great place in his life now, relaxed, and can kind of look back on his time at Georgia. Also, his connection to the ACC has actually worked out pretty well here. He can tell you a little bit about Jamie Newman. He can do some of those kind of things for you. So it was fun to get a chance to see that. That's available up and running for you on the DawgNation video channels as well. You heard early in the show, I played the audio from you for Andrew Thomas, the former Georgia offensive lineman. He was a part of our DawgNation Appreciation Series. We talked to Thomas, we talked to Swift, we talked to Jake Fromm, we talked to Isaiah Wilson, the former Georgia offensive tackle. It's been a really good run as of late with some great coronavirus lockdown interviews. I don't know how else to say it. There's just been a lot of good stuff out there in those regards. The great thing about the magic of video these days, it's all chronicled. It's still right there for you at the DawgNation video. So please make sure you check that out on both Facebook and YouTube. Become a subscriber to the DawgNation YouTube page if you have not done so already. That's a good thing to be able to do. And don't forget, on our program tomorrow, as I said, speaking of really good interviews, Jeff Sintel's done a lot of those with a lot of the recruits as well. And he'll be with us. We'll talk to him about what's going on with Dallas Turner, all the other recruiting news that's out there. We'll get into all of that tomorrow to close out the week in fun fashion. For now, though, we'll try to close out the show in style. And live sports last night, I was watching the NASCAR race. Chase Elliott, noted Georgia fan, I think he even had the UGA gear on his mask underneath his helmet last night. So he gets wrecked by Kyle Busch last night. First of all, it's just great to be talking about live sports and watching live sports. There's a ton of social media talk about this last night. It's kind of a cool thing to see. But for those of you who like NASCAR, you like Chase Elliott because he's a Georgia fan, have a bad look last night. The most hated driver in the sport, knocking out the most popular driver in the sport. Although I guess it probably drives a good bit of conversation for the sport there as well. So that's kind of a fun thing to see. Something else that's fun to see, you love these nice, even numbers and all this. Gator Hater Updater. I think I put the wrong number up there. It's not, I said 1,300, it's 1,200. I put the wrong number. No, actually, we are 1,300. That's right. No, it is. It's episode 1,200 of the show, 1,300 for Gator Hater Updater. Either way, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, and on video. So I messed that up. I got my numbers confused. It's episode 1,200 for our show today. It's episode Gator Hater number 1,300. So we were right about that. I got confused for a second. Nonetheless, let's roll in and do our R.S. Andrews cool down. Good stuff. We appreciate you being with us here today. We'll get some of your comments. We got a little bit of time here. Let's try to do 5-10 minutes worth of comments. We did a good number of comments earlier in the show. So we'll do a few more of yours, and we'll be off and running after. All right. Let me go back to Facebook here for a moment. Robert Reynolds says, 1,300. 1,300 for the Gator Hater Updater. Kind of cool to see that nice, even number, even though I initially kind of got that. Either way. Matt Rugavina enjoyed watching the Korean baseball. I've seen some of that. I watched some of the German soccer on Saturday. Graham Nixon asking about a tall guy. Yeah. I'm assuming he means about the basketball team. Yeah, they're a little short on the tall players right now. Winston Mock says he's missed having the glory at the end of the show. Yeah, the video audience are the ones who suffered the most. Not suffered, the right use, but while we were away from the studio, podcast didn't sound that different. It took me longer to put it together, but it didn't sound that different. Radio show for the most part wasn't that different. What was very different though was the video. That was quite. So yeah, that was the thing. Jamie Kennedy says, "What's your biggest worry on this year's team?" That the offense won't change enough. I think that keep doing what you've always done. You'll keep getting what you've always got. And for Georgia, we know that what has gotten the last couple of years is an offense that's below the national championship standard. In order to change that, they're going to have to change the way they do things. It's tempting not to want to change. Ask anyone who's ever quit smoking or lost weight. Change is hard even when you want to. Change is just a hard thing to do. It could be easy to convince yourself that your comfort zone's where you should remain. For Georgia, the comfort zone has been, kind of an offense that doesn't have a lot of razzle-dazzle and bells and whistles. It would be easy to come up with an excuse for this year, one that should just remain the same. Coronavirus this, blah, 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 that. But if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always got. And that's my biggest concern, that the offense won't change enough to win the games that really matter. when you are playing the best teams in the country, you've got to be able to match the explosive plays they bring to the table. You just do, because there's a mathematical unfairness to football. If I've got the best defense, and I stop you. Let's say I stonewall you the line of scrimmage 3 times, and then the next play you get an explosive play on me, and that pattern keeps playing out. Stonewall, 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 explosive play. Stonewall, 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 explosive play. My batting average of success against you is about 750, but I'm probably losing by 28 points on the scoreboard. That's just the natural unfairness of football. That the explosive plays on offense have such outsized importance. And when you face the Alabama shoes, potentially one day the Clemson, when you face them, you've got to be able to match the explosive plays they bring to the table. And Georgia's going to have to change offensively to be able to do that. And my biggest concern is, will those changes take place? You don't have to become Oklahoma. You don't have to even be statistically as good as LSU was a year ago. You just have to move more in that direction. Keith Fold says by this time next year, 1,665. Boy, fun to think about that. William and Elaine Morgan says offense going to average 37 points a game. I'm hoping it's more. I'm hoping it's more than that. All right, so Lynn Johnson Shipman has an interesting point. She says, when y'all post the shows, could you number the episodes in the title or put a date in the title? I have to go back and watch a few to catch up. I can't tell what order to watch. That's a really interesting point, Lynn. We do obviously number them when we put the podcast up on Spotify. We haven't typically numbered them on the video thing because of the fact that you just have less room, I guess, to put the headline. But I have kind of noticed that myself as well. It seems like when I'm going back and trying to rewatch, especially some of these on Facebook, it seems like it's showing me some of the videos, and I mean this for all of our Dog Nation. It seems like it's kind of showing some of them to me outside of chronological order. So I've kind of noticed that too, Lynn. I have. James Crump says, my biggest worry is that we'll get other playmakers at wide receiver besides Pickens. Yeah, you got to have more of that. I mean, what I'm hopeful is that Pickens can be a catalyst that opens an opportunity for other receivers to develop. But I'm hopeful that doesn't come at the expense of his own production. You get what I'm saying on that? I'd love to see the presence of Pickens make things easier for other receivers, especially for the guys who are faster than George. Because if you're thinking about the kind of player that ought to thrive playing next to George Pickens, it's someone who can work more quickly underneath, someone that's got that shiftiness of speed. What a Demetrius Robertson potentially is, or some of the other guys. Think about even like a guy like Arian Smith, assuming that he's in that opportunity. Some of those guys are a little faster. You would think they have an opportunity to really thrive next to George Pickens. I don't want all of that to come at the expense of actually getting the ball to Pickens. But what you're bringing up, I think, is a very real concern. Let me do a couple more on Facebook. We'll go over to YouTube. Willie Foster Jr. says, I pray we don't have to reset the Gatorade updater. Yeah, you and me both. I got to find a new gimmick, too. I'm going to do more on Florida tomorrow. I mean, like, the one thing I'm going to say is, you saw Athlon Sports rank Florida ahead of Georgia. Like, here's the one thing I hope that you will appreciate about it. Like, I give a lot of hot takes and spout opinion. And when you give a bunch of opinions, some of them are going to be wrong. The one thing, hopefully, I don't do is run from my wrong opinions. I'll give you an example of them. I told you last year that I thought Florida would finish the season unranked. My reasoning for this was that in the preseason top 10, there's always a team that finishes unranked. I thought the most likely team to do that might be Florida. At the very beginning of the year, it looked like I might have some room for that. As Bill Bender mentioned before, Felipe Frank struggling for Florida. Maybe lucky to beat Miami. That's kind of a weird game. Kentucky, no easy game for Florida there either. But by the end of the season, Florida had stabilized itself. And they got some help against the officials against South Carolina, but that notwithstanding, late season games, when they had a chance to fold, especially when they had nothing left to play for after losing to Georgia, Florida kind of did. So if you look at a preseason ranking, and I'm not sure what the exact numbers were, I think Florida may have been 6th, Georgia may have been 7th, whatever it was. Florida was ranked ahead of Georgia. Now, I'll tell you this. I was wrong about Florida a year ago. They were better than I thought they were. And they're not as good as Georgia, and they're still not. I'm still pretty confident in that. But in relationship with the rest of college football, they were better than I gave them credit. So here's the one thing you got to think about when you move ahead to this season. If, once again, with exact, but let's say that magazine's got Florida 6, Georgia 7. There's a really good chance they're not wrong about Florida. Florida may very well be 6. 6 can be a long way removed from a national championship, but there's a good chance that they're not wrong about Florida. That Florida, easy schedule, returning starters, returning quarterback, top 10 the last 2 years, that they're ready to do all of that again. But the thing you have to hope for, and the thing I think that we will probably see take place is that while Athlon wasn't wrong about Florida, they are wrong about Georgia. That Georgia's still better than the Gators and still closer to that national championship threshold Florida is. We may do some more on that tomorrow, but that's kind of one of the thoughts that's been kind of rolling around in my head, that as chief Gator hater and the fun that I have with Eddie and everything like that, this is not just every single year, coming on here and telling you that Florida's going to lose 10 games and then pretending I never said it if it turns out to be wrong. What I said last year, I took very seriously. Florida ended up being better than I gave them credit. So good enough to put some pressure on Georgia to make sure it's as good as it can be. That's probably true for the Gators. Let me do a few more YouTube comments, then we got to go after. Couple on YouTube, we got to go. Christopher Wilson says, which scenario would you prefer? 11-1 with a Bama loss and win the SEC championship, or 12-0 and lose the SEC championship? If you're Georgia, you can't lose the SEC championship. And I think it's an interesting question. A team like Alabama, because it has won national championships, will get the benefit of the doubt. Got the benefit of the doubt in 2017. Even if Georgia's 12-0, having beaten Alabama, I don't trust the committee to give Georgia benefit of the doubt there. And it's not an anti-Georgia bias, and it's not because the board athletic director is on the select committee or whatever other conspiracy theory happens to be floating around there at any given moment. Georgia just hasn't reached the level of getting that benefit of the doubt yet. The committee, they just haven't gotten there yet. So if Georgia wants to be in the playoff, it needs to win the SEC. A team like Alabama, maybe not quite so much. 2017 seems to be proof of that, and Alabama validated that by winning the national. But for Georgia, it seems likely they have to win the SEC to make the playoff, and maybe that's the way it should be, but that's probably the way that it is. Enrique Murillo says, do we even know if we'll play Virginia in September? Right now, nothing's certain, Enrique. Virginia's obviously been one of the programs that's kind of talked a little bit more cautiously about football's return. That probably has something to do with the state in which it's located. If I'm betting the game will be played. It's not a given that it will be. As I said before, Virginia's been a little careful with some of the language that it's used. But if I'm betting, I'm going to bet the game will take place. And how many fans are there? That's the thing I don't know. Good question, though. Nothing is certain on that as of yet, but I'm betting that it will. Couple more. Noah Sheldon 500 says Florida's not going to be at all. He says they're going to lose to Florida State, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. Boy, I'd be a happy guy if that happened. What's funny is I don't think he had LSU on there. So that's kind of interesting. I think the LSU Florida game is in Gainesville this year, I think. Actually, I know it is. They were in. Frank Patterson says, I've ever seen a collar transfer ceremony with the mascot UGA. No, I've never seen that. That'd be a cool thing to see. I wonder if there's any videos. Chevron Hannah says he wears gator shoes to church. I like that, man. That reminds me of the old Ric Flair days in the NWA when he took that alligator loafer off and show it on TV. That's cool. Enrique Murillo says South Carolina will talk some trash prior to playing Georgia. They probably might. I would imagine that's probably coming in. All right. We're going to get ready to go here. Chevron Hannah also says he hopes his season ticket doesn't get affected. Yeah, boy, I think it's way too early to know that. That ticket thing is going to be tricky now. I'm just telling you it's going to be. I am just telling you it is going to be. All right. Yeah, Daniel Lewis mentioning the Ohio State model of the between 25 and 50,000 fans. What he did not mention yesterday at all, and I went back and looked at the quote, the possibility of there being 100,000 fans. I don't know that means they definitely won't be, but he did not mention that yesterday. Phil Rogers says the LSU Florida game is in Gainesville. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to get ready to go. Huge thanks to all of you making this possible. Big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews there as well. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing. Like, you can trust them to do all of that for you, just like they do all of it for us here at Dog Nation. So, hot weather coming up, Memorial Day weekend. That means the hot weather is going to be out in full effect. Get your system tuned back up. The summer that's on its way, just $99. I'll give you the peace of mind that it's going to be a nice, cool comfort all summer long. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. If you missed any portion of our show, I'll have a podcast for you in just a moment. We'll see you on the radio at noon on 960 The Rep, and back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Talk to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.